think there's a couple of really deep points here. One is, as computer scientists, right, and sort of a fairly hyper-focused and fundamentally biased industry, right, in terms of like who's selected in the industry, who's in the valley, those biases are invisible, right? I was a Zen Buddhist for many years, and a great Zen koan is don't ask a fish about the ocean, right? It's literally unconscious bias. It's invisible. Nobody's going to choose to be biased. But on the other hand, cognition is fundamentally bias. You cannot separate from cognition from bias. It is bias. You are choosing in cognition to throw out some things, not attend to that data, process others, and come up to a conclusion. Otherwise, you're boiling the ocean. You can't look at every piece of data about everything and then compute all of that, right? That's nonsensical. So cognition kind of is bias. The other component, though, of this bias is that we tend to elevate and put on a pedestal computer science, right? So we understand this algorithmic impact. We know how to accelerate this stuff in hardware. We know how to store, retrieve, and all those things. And that's important. But there's a tendency to believe that that's the most important stuff, and that if you understand that, you can solve for anything. But if we were to be intellectually and morally honest, we'd say there's another field just as deep, which is ethics. And if you had spent 25 years in ethics, you would have frameworks and ease of use and ability to move through different conceptual problems and quickly say this is the right answer. Whereas we have all this experience in CS and we've got no experience in ethics, and then we want to suddenly tackle problems that are like master class. So as we get into these conversations about data ethics, I think we can do a couple of things. One, we can bring a lot more ethicists and philosophers into the industry, right? We can make it larger. We can make it a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable tent. And the more that we do that, the more it'll be a positive feedback loop, because the more different people that we get in, the more complete our thinking will be, and the more that we'll match our competencies in CS with our competencies in ethics. That said, I actually think that data is going to be the most fraught area of ethics that humans have ever invented, because for the next couple of decades, more and more our lives are going to be governed by machine learning, and you may call it AI. And unlike what we've learned to do in CS, which is to program, it's like a recipe. We build things to execute the way that we expect them to and not the way that we don't. ML is more like training a puppy. Right? So if you've ever had a puppy, and maybe you had a neighbor's kid come watch the puppy, maybe they gave it some treats for things that you wouldn't necessarily approve of, and you come back and your puppy's picked up new behaviors. These unexpected things happen all the time in ML. You can call them skew, you can call it drift, you can call it underfit, overfit, all sorts of things. It's fitting data. Do we even have the right tools to say, is the data biased? So that when we train the machine can't help but have biases. Now, if cognition is biased, that's fine. But we have to agree that there are ethical and non-ethical biases. If I train a set of data that's brilliant at predicting home prices, default rates, good credit, creditworthiness, loan payments, but implicitly in the hidden layer, it's redlining and determining, right, oh, it's because we figured out this stuff about who you are as an archetype of a categorical person, therefore you're not creditworthy. That's not only unethical, that's illegal. So building some of these structures that say, okay, how do we start to understand marrying ethics with machine learning is going to be incredibly important. And right now we're in a moment where the person with the most data, the company with the most data, is at an enormous asymmetrical advantage to all of the rest of the human population in the world. So more and more of our future is being defined by companies that are not really effectively regulated. Less and less of our future right now is being governed by governments whose job is to look out for the rights of the citizens. So I think this next decade plus is going to be one of an accelerating asymmetry, because the revenue opportunity for getting leverage out of the data that's collected and managed and interpreted about you is going to far outpace the ability of governments to intelligently regulate it. So as a society of practitioners, yes, we absolutely have an ethical responsibility. Furthermore, we may actually have an oversight responsibility, right, as educated industry leaders and citizens, so that we don't end up leaving our grandchildren with a problem that is the size of climate change, but in the world of data, privacy, and personal freedoms.
Right, and what we know about human nature and also about capitalism, that will happen unless we proactively say we have to put a stop to this. And this is what I was saying, like No one on their own is going to just say, oh, I'm just going to address my unconscious bias. And they wouldn't even know how to, like you said. You just don't, that's not the way we're wired. And that's not even what's rewarded, right? So we have to change that 100% and make sure that's what's rewarded is fixing this imbalance that has been created and has been now written into the DNA of what we have been building and are continuing to build. So until we undo that, which has to be a proactive effort, and one of the things that we try to do in open source, and you hear so many people talking about it all the time, is diversifying communities. But what does that really mean? I mean, shout out to my dear friend Nithya Ruff, who has spent so shout out to my friend Nithya Ruff, who's spent a lot of time trying to figure out, there's so many different roles in building these communities, and in open source especially, that aren't just the technical roles, which are the ones that have historically been valued above the other roles. And you had a lot of people, it took a long time and a very concerted effort from a lot of people to make sure that we're showing that all of the roles are valued, and that, humanities majors and, ethics and philosophy and all of the different people and the different tools that you bring to the community are going to be necessary. And it's not just your diverse background from what part of the world you live in, and what is your ethnicity, and what is your sexual orientation, and all of the stuff that we kind of tend to think about, gender. It's a lot more than that. It's the diversity of thinking, because then you have a community that will be able to not just say, hey, no, that's messed up, but we'll just start building things the right way from the beginning, hopefully.